Hello, and thank you for being with me. In all the years I've been doing real estate investing, fix and flips, wholesales, rentals, you name it, I've bought a lot of properties and I have never lost earnest money on one of mine. I can't remember one time. Now, I've been doing this for almost 22 years, but I cannot recall a single time I've lost earnest money. And it's a fear that lots of investors have, and it's a fear that lots of potential investors have and keeps them from going out there and making some offers and making things happen. So I can say this does happen where people lose their earnest money, and I want to make sure you know that you can completely avoid this. Even if you're placing a bunch of offers, and even if you back out of a deal, you can avoid this, losing your earnest money. So what I want to do is show you a strategy that will ensure you don't lose your earnest money on any of your fix and flip offers. How to place lots of offers and never lose your earnest money. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to be covering a big mistake I made when I first started investing. And I don't want you to make this same mistake. We're going to go through the methods that I learned to unlock the number of offers you can place, literally limitless numbers of offers without tying up so much earnest money. We're going to go through the process of making an offer and what most people get wrong and how you can avoid those things. Now, just a quick note. Attorneys are making me say this, you know how this goes, but this isn't legal advice, it's general information. It's to help you understand the process. Everything you use is for examples, and things can vary state by state, but we're trying to teach principles here, and then you can apply that to your specific situation. So when I first started investing, I would write an earnest money check every single time I made an offer. So I had maybe an extra $1,000, $2,000. Well, I was writing earnest money somewhere between $500 and $1,000, which means I was limited to only writing a couple of offers per week because I had to use that earnest money and had to write the check, okay? The problem is if you made 10 offers at $1,000 earnest money, that's $10,000, and lots of people don't have $10,000 every single week. Of course, if you did that for a month, it's gonna add up fast. So I was looking for better ways to actually do this. So this is what I did. I gave my title company or your closing attorney a check for $1,000 just to hold it. I'm like, just keep this in your escrow account. And then I would write purchase contracts, as many as I wanted. And I had a letter from title saying I had $1,000 deposited in their escrow account. And so then they would say, oh, okay, the money's already there, but I was using the same $1,000 for all of it. Does that make sense? So basically that same $1,000 was using for all the offers. I wasn't putting $1,000 each time I was writing an offer. I was using that letter that the money was deposited there. I was making 10, 20, 30, 40 offers with that. Now you're gonna ask me, well, what if they all get accepted? First off, congratulations. That's fantastic. That's what you want to see happen. But it's not going to happen. But if a couple of them get accepted, then what we'll do is you'll have to go and give more earnest money, or you will remove yourself from the contract. More about that here in just a minute. But then I got even smarter, right? That's the idea here. We always want to be solving a better problem in life, right? We want to keep solving a better problem. So I wrote a purchase contract, and I said that the earnest money would be deposited 3 business days after the offer has accepted. Now, acceptance is when the buyer and the seller sign the contract and they both are in agreement, meaning buyer makes an offer, seller may counteroffer, buyer may counteroffer back, and then they come to a meeting of the minds and they all sign. That's going to be an accepted offer. So I don't have to deposit earnest money for 3 business days after the time accepted. Now I'll tell you, that's important because calendar days are a problem. Sometimes there's holidays and banks are closed. Sometimes you've got your weekends. So I'm going to do business days, which is a Monday through Friday, which gives me plenty of time to get that money in without being in jeopardy of losing this contract. So that meant I didn't even have to write a check until after the seller actually accepted the offer. So I didn't run around with earnest money. I wasn't giving earnest money to my title company. I wasn't doing any of those things. What I was doing is promising to give the earnest money if we had an accepted offer within 3 business days of the time of acceptance, not from the date I wrote the offer. So if I wrote my offer, let's whiteboard this. Whoops. If I write my offer, right, and the offer gets accepted, What I'm basically saying is within 3 days of the time that it gets accepted. So if I made an offer on the 1st and we do counter offers and it gets accepted on the 5th when both parties have signed and agreed, I have 3 business days after the 5th to actually get that money into escrow. So that's really important to realize, and it will save you a ton of problems. Now, this is very helpful. Some board of realtors have actually put this in their contracts where the earnest money can be given 3 days after. If not, you can simply add it. Buyer will deposit earnest money at X title company, your closing attorney within 3 business days after acceptance. Okay, that's how it is. Now, no, I told you earlier, I'm not an attorney, even though I know how to do some of these things. This way, I only came up with earnest money if a seller accepted the offer, which saved me. So this is my recommendation that you should be using, is depositing earnest money 3 business days after acceptance, okay? We're gonna talk more about this. So this is to make sure when you make an offer, you put in earnest money 3 days. We talked about that. 3 days after acceptance at X title company. Make sure you're depositing the earnest money with your title company or your closing attorney. You want to have a relationship with one, and if you don't, you want to find an investor-friendly real estate attorney or title company to make sure they've got your best interests at heart, okay? Ways you can actually lose your earnest money. That's what we want to talk about here. What's some things you can do to actually lose your earnest money? Well, you can give it to the seller. That lots of times I've seen earnest money go away when it's given to the seller. You can go past your inspections and evaluations deadline. You can go past your appraisal deadline. You can go past your loan denial deadline. If you do not close on time or get an extension, you could lose your earnest money. So there's multiple ways here that you can actually lose your earnest money. So let me talk about an overview of purchase contracts and how addendums work. I alluded to this just a little bit earlier, but an addendum overrides only the things that are specified on that addendum. Let me explain here. Everything else then stays the same if it hasn't explicitly been changed on that addendum. So let's give you an example here. Contract purchase price $100,000 with a closing date of January 1st. Addendum 1 signed by all parties says the purchase price is going to be $105,000. Guess what? The closing date still remains the same on January 1st, but the purchase price goes from 100 to 105. Whatever is in the last signed addendum overrides whatever is there prior that's agreed upon and signed by everybody. So you do not have to write a whole new contract. You don't have to write a whole new purchase. You simply, with an addendum, change what you want to have changed and all parties sign so that you're all on the same page. Let's talk for a minute about why you don't want to give your earnest money to a seller. So the seller is a party to the contract. You want to give your money to a neutral third party, and I prefer a neutral third party that's leaning in my direction just a hair, and I know how they operate. That's obviously the best thing for me. So if you give to a seller, they can spend it, and you may never see that money again, and going after that can be a mess. So if you give your money to a title company or closing attorney, they have to keep it in an escrow account. So you may say, well, what's an escrow account? An escrow account means they're not using that account for general operations. They have a separate bank account that money that's not theirs goes into this account. Then if I go and close, they'll transfer it from the escrow account to their general account to pay the fees and costs and those things. So that's basically a protected account, and your closing attorneys and title companies should have insurance, and their underwriters should be insuring if something ever happened to that money. So it's a good place knowing where that money should be. So if you go past an inspections deadline, this is another way you could lose your earnest money. You should have an inspections and evaluations deadline. This gives you the opportunity to relook at all of your numbers, and it gives you the opportunity to go get an inspection on the property. It lets you relook at all of your comps, okay? Making a determination and making sure it's actually a good deal. Remember, it's inspections and evaluations. If during your evaluations, for any reason, you can get out of the contract and get your earnest money back as long as it is prior to the deadline. And a lot of people think they have to give a reason why they're getting out. You don't have to. You say, hey, due to inspections and evaluations, seller is canceling the contract, sign it, send it, and your earnest money comes back to you. That's how simple that is. But you've got to do that prior to the deadline, okay? Now, if you go past your appraisal deadline, this can be an issue. If the values don't come where you need them to be, then you may have a problem and you could lose some earnest money. However, typically your lender is going to require something on the appraisal to be in line, so you might be able to get out of it with a loan denial letter. We're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. Some places it's standard to have an appraisal deadline and loan denial to be the same thing. Appraisal, loan denial may be the same thing, or they may be separated. Now, if you're drafting that contract, you can do it however you want. So we'll talk more about that. So going past deadlines on loan denial. If you go past loan denial and you cannot get funding, you can lose your earnest money. Make sure you know the lender can really do the loan and you're in communication with the lender and you're just not approved or pre-approved. Like they've got stuff ready to go. It's like, yes, we can make this thing happen. Don't close on the settlement deadline. This is the day you're actually supposed to close. If you don't do that, you could lose your earnest money. There's also some other remedies depending upon how the contract was written for a default. This could be default of a buyer. It will go by whatever this agreement says that you guys have put together. Or if there's a state law that may override that, which usually there's just what the contract says in most cases. There's 3 remedies. The seller keeps the earnest money if you default for any of these reasons. The seller sues to make you purchase the property, or the seller sues for liquidated damages. Those are the recourses, depending upon what your contract says. So the way to avoid all of these remedies is make sure you do not have it in your contract. So say, hey, no, none of these remedies can be there. But what we will do is we are going to be going after off-market properties. If they are listed on the MLS, you will have to use a realtor form. These forms have a lot to do with them. There's a lot of paperwork with them. We want to get really simple. And let's talk a minute about getting extensions. Okay, extensions. This is basically saying we can't get our inspections done by November 5th, we're gonna need till November 10th. And all you've gotta do is put that on an addendum, get the buyer and seller, the buyer and the seller to sign that, and your deadline has been extended. Now, typically, most deadlines are gonna end at 5 p.m. on that day. So as long as before 5 p.m., and some states may say it's midnight, but most cases, I think the easiest way is to say 5 p.m. in the time zone. Plan on that. You have to get that addendum over and signed, and then you can get an extension. Now, if you ask for it and they don't accept it, then you can say, well, if you don't extend it, then we're gonna have to pull out of the contract. Loan denial can be changed to December 31st. The addendum overrides what was already there in the prior purchase contract because, again, addendums override the specific things that you are talking about in that addendum. Everything else remains the same. Extend all deadlines. Be careful. If you have to get an extension for one of these things, this may impact other things. For example, if your inspector can't get in the property for a little while and you've got to bump out that inspections deadline, that might also need to bump out your loan denial deadline, and it may also need to bump out your closing deadline. You don't want to get yourself into a jam. So you've got to be very realistic on these deadlines, especially if you run into a problem. It's much easier to push all of the deadlines at once rather than pushing your inspection and then having to go back and push your loan denial and then having to go back and push your closing. Just do it all at once. Say, hey, this is just gonna set everything back so that you can be realistic and it's easier for the seller to know. If you're not extending closing deadlines, those are some things you may need to think about extending in the event you have to do any type of extension, just to extend all of them. Be careful if you have an extension for one of these things. Make sure you look at other deadlines, make sure they're realistic, and extend the other ones as well. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about how to get out of the contract. Let's say for some reason, maybe it's your inspections, maybe it's your evaluations, maybe it's the values, maybe it's the loan denial, whatever the case is, we want to talk about how you can get out of a deal. And I'll tell you, this stops most people from making offers. You've got to be comfortable getting out of a deal. So if you really determine this isn't a good deal for you or a good deal in general, you just have to get the seller notice that you're canceling the contract due to inspections and evaluations, appraisal, loan denial, those types of things, and say earnest money is returned. The other thing is you do not want to have non-refundable earnest money. I do not ever recommend having non-refundable earnest money or ever giving non-refundable earnest money. This can be a massive problem. I do not recommend it. I would not be doing that unless you are someone that has your own cash to close your own deals, because then you know, hey, I can really make this thing happen. But if you're getting any type of financing, if you were doing any type of inspections, I do not recommend doing non-refundable earnest money. Now, most of the people that want non-refundable earnest money are wholesalers. And a wholesaler is somebody gets it under contract and is trying to sell that for a higher price, and they want non-refundable earnest money to make sure you're actually serious. The problem with that is you need to inspect the property, you need to make sure you can get a loan on the property. So unless you have cash, I do not recommend doing non-refundable earnest money. Now, don't be afraid to make offers. Frankly, don't be afraid to make a lot of offers. That's what it takes to have some success. It takes many offers to end up with a deal.